Treble, mid, bass. That's what I like. I'm not a real tweaky person. Obviously, sometimes I have to do that to fix some problem. I kind of learned early on that if you want somebody to come forward, you don't need to start doing crazy EQs. Sometimes just turning the volume up and just wider EQs. To me, it sounds better when I have a wider shape EQ.
Tony Hoffer's name is plastered across a number of albums dating back to the mid-90s, from acclaimed releases by Beck and Phoenix to hits by the Kooks and M83. He's remained an in-demand producer and mixer both in the US and UK, and is regularly recruited by labels and artists alike to help with their projects. I'll be talking to Tony today about his history in the music business, how he formed relationships with some of his most recurring collaborators, what his thoughts are on gear and production, and what it's like running his own label. Hey, Tony, thanks for coming on the Soyuz podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
What was the first gig that you saw that really blew your mind?
The first gig that blew my mind, I'd seen some shows prior to this, but the first gig that blew my mind was at a little club in LA that no longer exists called the Anti-Club.
I read poetry there when I was a teenager.
Okay, so there you go. It was yeah. I mean, there was a lot of cool stuff
on Melrose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think when the earthquake, was it 92 or quake? I think, a lot of clubs. I think Raji's got demolished and. Or they had to demo it, but yeah, Raji's the Anti-Club was one of them. But anyway, I saw this band. I was 15, and I went with some friends who were 16. They had a car, so we drove from the Valley, Chatsworth. Drove from Chatsworth, which is a bit of a drive, out to Hollywood, and in their car, which was just super cool. And we saw this band called Lions and Ghosts.
Lions and Ghosts.
Yeah.
Hang on, man. Wait a minute. I think I worked with one of them at Nana. Maybe it was the guitar player.
Rick? Was it?
Yeah.
Rick Parker?
I think, wait, was he the singer or the guitar player?
He sang and I believe played guitar as well.
I think I know who he was. I think I met him, but the other guy I think he was just a guitar player. He was tall and handsome with long, dark hair. Yeah.
They were all looked super cool,
Yeah, Lions and Ghosts.
And it was just so cool because they were doing, they were a rock band, but they had a keyboard player, and it was, the songs were just really cool, and they were catchy songs, but it had kind of a, bit of like a punk ethos to it. And I was just so into it. And then some other band played after them. And I don't remember who that was, but I remember that the music that they were playing right after Lions and Ghosts played was a band called the Meat Puppets, who just had a new album out called Up on the Sun. And they were playing some song that I thought, whoa, this just sounded so cool. And it was just, I don't know, that gig really stood out for me in that it was just seeing a band that, these guys weren't much older than me, and it's kind of thinking, yeah, maybe I could do that,
Wow.
And just hearing music that I hadn't been exposed to, because the Meat Puppets, weren't being played on the radio, and and at that time that was how the majority of music discovery was happening.
What a different time, no?
Yeah, different times. Other than going to the local record store, Tower Records or whatever, and asking someone there, like, hey, I like this. If I like this, what would you recommend for me? That was also a good, how music discovery happened back in the day. But yeah, it was It was cool. It was a cool time.
Yeah, I remember was it the first gig? The two first gigs I ever went to. I can't remember which came first, but it was both around the same time. I think I was 14. One was X and the maomaos at out in the valley at the country club.
The Palomino?
I think it was the country club.
Oh,
I can't remember, but anyway, it was X and the maomaos.
wait, was
And
it
then
the country club in Reseda?
it might have been. I mean, at that age, like I just didn't know where anything was except, I lived in Koreatown, but it was just on the other side of the hills.
Yeah.
And then the other was the Clash and the English Beat at the Hollywood Palladium.
Oh,
that was mind blowing.
Moose.
Yeah.
Those are two insane gigs. I never saw X. I would have loved, and then I discovered X shortly after the Lions and Ghosts gig. I discovered X, and everything kind of opened up. They were amazing. The country club, I remembered it was on Sherman Way in Reseda. A few doors down from it was a place called Bebop Records. You remember Bebop?
I remember hearing about it. I never made it out there.
So this was an iconic, God, I'm forgetting the guy's name. It'll come to me, but this amazing guy, he was an artist. He basically set up a shop on Sherman Way in the heart of the valley, kind of in a bit of a bizarre place. And he was an artist, and so he would sell his art, and then he had records that he would sell. Just a few, not many, but a few bays of records, like maybe 6 or 7 bays of records. It was a very small store. But then at night he would have artists play or have people read poetry. And so that was a few order. And we my old band played there with Beck, funny enough, years ago. And that was a few doors down from the country club. I remember seeing that spot.
Wow. I for some reason it reminded me, this is years later, but do you remember a store on Vermont called, I think it was Mondo Video?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was in there one day. With my friend John Tottenham, the poet. And I'm looking through some records, and I see a record by Magazine. And I say, John, check it out, man, a Magazine record. Like, that's a rare thing to find. And he looks at it and he goes, I think it was About the Weather. And he's like, About the Weather? Oh, that's not one of their best. And then there were only 2 other people in the shop, a man and a woman. And the guy says, yeah, that really isn't one of the best ones. And it was Barry Adamson, the bass player for Magazine.
What?
Yeah, those types of things make me think that the universe actually has a sense of humor.
What was he doing there?
He was just shopping. He was just,
in the valley, like, it's so
on Vermont, like in Los Feliz.
Okay, sorry, yeah. That's so random. Because back then, Vermont and Los Feliz and Silver Lake, that was kind of no man's land, really.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot different than it is now.
Yeah, it was out of the way.
I was back recently, and yeah, it's a kind of a whole other animal.
Now it's a whole other thing, but I remember, because in the 80s and even early 90s, past past Hollywood, it was a bit too far. You didn't really
a bridge too far.
Yeah, and I don't know. So it was just, there wasn't really much happening in Silver Lake. You didn't really hear about Silver Lake. It was just kind of sleepy.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. It was like affordable. It was full of interesting people. There was that coffee house, the Onyx on Vermont, where the owner used to let me play sax, because they had 2 sides, like the coffee house side and the gallery side. And the gallery only opened like in the afternoon or at night. So he would let me, in the mornings, he'd give me the key and I could go in and practice saxophone in there. And yeah, I feel bad for young people in Los Angeles now, because, back then you could have like a cool existence for a kind of a reasonable price, like you could work a normal job and have a band, or you didn't have to be wealthy just to afford an apartment.
Yeah, it's definitely doesn't help the art being,
No. So tell me, Tony, Memphis, Miami,
Yeah.
did you actually live there?
So I was born in Memphis.
Wow.
And I lived there until I lived there for about 1 year, I would say. My dad was going to college there at the time. And my parents, they were very young. My mom was 20 when she had me, and they were just kids. And my dad was in school, and he was going to school in Memphis. And then that's where I was born. And then after 1 year, then we moved back to where they're from, where they grew up, which is Detroit.
Wow.
So where all their family was and everything. And then so I lived in Detroit for probably until I was about 3 or 4. And then we moved, my grandparents, my mom's parents, moved down to Miami to get out of Detroit, basically. And just the weather, they were just sick of Detroit, scraping ice off the windshield.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you're like, I'm done. So they were done, and they moved down to Miami. And so again, my parents were young. My mom was 23 or 24, and dad, so we basically followed them down to Miami, and that's where I would say I grew up. That's my younger years would be in Miami, and then we moved to LA when I was a teenager. So my teenage years would be LA, and then I lived in San Francisco.
What part of LA?
Well, Chatsworth.
Okay. That part of LA. That's funny. Okay.
Yeah, Deep Valley.
So at some point, well, I was born in Canoga Park. I shouldn't laugh.
Okay.
I grew up in Koreatown, but I was born in Canoga Park. Earwax.
Yeah.
You went somehow from intern to staff engineer at Earwax in San Francisco. Do you want to tell me a little about that?
Yeah. So basically, I was in a band for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years in LA, and we'd kind of taken it.
What was it called?
We were called This Great Religion. And, I don't know, it was kind of like a cross. What we did was a cross between Wire and My Bloody Valentine meets maybe Tears for Fears, because I'll say that because some of the songs, they were, we were trying to write catchy songs and have choruses, but the guitar and bass and drum, the textures were more akin to a lot of the post-punk stuff that we were into, like Wire and Joy Division, Cure, all that kind of stuff. And My Bloody Valentine, the heaviness of it, blurriness of it. So, but yeah, we did that. We had a good run of 6 or 7 years, and then we just kind of took a little hiatus, which I think we're still on. I'm not sure, but and then I moved up to San Francisco. I wanted to get out of LA and just kind of drop into a new place, and so
What year was that?
That was 94. Maybe it was actually, no, it might have been a little bit earlier. Maybe it was 93. Yeah, I think it was 93. So moved up to San Francisco, pestered Earwax. I'd read something about Earwax, that they were in a book about something called multimedia. Well, demystifying multimedia. I still have it. And basically it was talking about how this new thing called multimedia, which was essentially using computer technology and games and incorporating video and audio. And now you don't even think about merging all of this stuff together. But back then it was a little more tricky if you're talking about how computers would work with that. So that studio stood out to me. It seemed like they were doing some cool stuff. So when I got up there, I just pestered them for months for an internship or even just a meeting. And eventually I got one of the guys on the phone, a guy named Barney Jones, and he's like, yeah, come by. I'll show you the place. You know, I think he kind of felt bad for me. So I came by, he showed me the place. It looked super cool. You know, I'd never really been in a studio before. Well, actually, that's not true. I've been in a bunch of studios, but I'd never been in a studio where I was potentially going to become a part of the studio. You know, I'd been in studios with my band previously, making music, obviously, but this was kind of a different thing. And I really needed a job as well. So he's like, great. Well, there you go. He showed me the studio, and that was it. So then I kept contacting him, you know, every 6 weeks or so, I'd hit him back. And finally he said, hey, look, you know, why don't you come down? And he gave me a shot as an intern. And so, you know, it's basically dealing with the fax machine, getting burritos, answering phones, like whatever. That was pretty much it, for no pay. But I could go in at night and I had access to the studios. And so I would go in and just kind of figure it out, you know, figure out how a patch bay works, figure out what happens if you run a whole mix into outboard gear, like an Eventide H3000, and try all the different settings and, you know, basically break things and put them back together. And I feel like that time then was a big part of, I suppose, what was to come next. And I was doing a lot of that on my own already, you know, but this studio had much better equipment than what I had in my home studio.
Let's just for a moment talk about the Eventide H3000, because that's it for me, an amazing piece of gear. Like, and I'm someone who's never been into gear. Beck actually said when I started Soyuz, he said, David, if you asked me who the last person on earth to start a gear company would be, I would have said you. And it's true. I'm not like a big gear guy, but yeah, that H3000 or the Eventide, the H3000, the very first Brazzaville album I made, the producer, this guy, Michael Rosan, used it.
Hold up. Was he a drummer?
Yeah.
Dude. From Canada.
Yes. Yeah. French Canadian.
Yes. Wow. Me and Justin auditioned him as a drummer years, like in 80, 88 or 89. We auditioned him for a drummer, and I remember he had this insane electronic kit, like a Simmons kit. And we showed us photos of back maybe when he had that. And he looked amazing, and he was super cool. That's so funny. I think I remember.
Well, he's an incredible guy. Like, when I decided to start Brazzaville and I was looking for a place to record, I asked around for different studios, and I think it was this guy, Michael Whitmore at the Onyx, who said, you might want to try this guy, Michael Rosan. I said, okay. So I had gone to a couple studios, and, you know, they were pretty typical. And so I go out to this house out in North Hollywood, and I knock on the door, and this guy answers wearing purple silk pajamas, combat boots, smoking a clove cigarette with like dreadlocks and a little like Satan mustache, you know, beard combination. He's like,
yeah,
come on in. I'm like, this is the guy. Yeah. This is where I wanted to record.
That is awesome. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, he used the Eventide a lot.
Yeah.
And also I know Bowie, I think it was on, I don't know if it was Low or Heroes, but I mean, I know that, I guess it was Tony Visconti maybe that used the Eventide a lot, especially on that snare sound. I think it was on Low. And it wouldn't have been an H3000, I guess, but it was some Eventide. Yeah, I bought one just to try to get that snare sound.
They're incredible.
So we were at Earwax, and you were breaking things and putting them back together as an intern. And somehow you ended up becoming the staff engineer. How did that did you have to poison somebody, or?
No, I mean, you know what? Basically, all it was my enthusiasm to be there for no money. I wasn't getting paid as an intern. I think my enthusiasm, and I showed up. And anything they needed, you know, I was there. Like whatever they needed, I would stay extra hour. I would stay after hours. I only had to be there, let's say, until, I don't know, maybe 5 o'clock or whatever. But I'd stay till 10. I basically stay until, you know, they like, it's time. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, you know?
Right.
But, yeah. And so I think they saw my enthusiasm and they said, let's give him a shot. And I remember, you know, and I had a horrible office job as well at the time, just to make ends meet. And I was also working on my own music, thinking that, you know, maybe I'll be kind of like a solo artist. I was still writing songs and recording on my own. And I had a day job in an office that was just dreadful. And I knew, you know, I've got to cause something to click, you know, got to kind of create some luck to happen. And sure enough, there was something that came up. There was a project that came in to Earwax where they needed someone. Everybody was kind of busy with things, and they needed someone to sort of be involved with this particular project and look after the project for them. And the guy said, would you be interested in doing this? And I said, without hesitation, yes. And I was very nervous because I had money coming in from this, you know, my minimum wage office job. So I was very nervous to lose that. And I said, yes. And sure enough, I felt like I was falling backwards into an abyss. You know, I'm going to say yes, and it's going to be good. Sure enough, the gig falls through. It got canceled and I'd quit my job. Yeah. And as these things go, you know, but something else came in a couple of weeks after that, you know, shortly after that, which ended up working out great. And I was able to really, you know, they let me do that one, and I was able to prove myself. Had I had, you know, and I think it was good making that decision that at this point I was seriously all in. I burnt the ships, you know, and I'm all in at that point. So, and basically from that point, I've just done music.
Yeah. Wow. It's so inspiring. I mean, I think a couple of things that you said are really important for young people to hear. You know, one of them is go the extra mile for free. You know, like if you're doing something that you perceive as being kind of part of your dream, because the short-term money is nothing compared to what things can lead to. You know. And then the other is that leap of faith. Like I'm a big believer that like often you have to let one door close before the other one will open. And that time in between in the hall it can be terrifying, but there's almost no other way to do it, you know?
Yeah. You sometimes just have to commit and go all in. I don't know. And
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Beck. Because that's where you and I met. We met in the like Midnight Vulture days. I think it was.
Yeah,
or maybe it was a little bit before that.
It was before. Yeah, it was the making, because we were making Midnight Vultures. So it would have been, we probably met in 98, 99.
Something like that. Yeah. And something I didn't know was it that JMJ gave Beck a track of your music? Is that how you guys ended up working together?
Yeah. So basically, I knew Beck from just around the scene, like back before he got signed and everything kicked off for him. My band and Beck, like we would play shows together, and we were kind of in this scene that with other bands, you know, a band called Failure, Stanford Prison Experiment. There were just kind of a bunch of bands that were not doing what was popular at the time, meaning like hair metal stuff. So we were kind of the alternate. We were doing the alternate to that. We were all doing alternative music. There wasn't really a name for it back then. now we would just call it alternative, but without knowing it, we were just doing our own thing. And so we would all do shows together, and we, so I knew Beck from that, and we hung out a bit, and back in those days. And then Justin Melville Johnson, who was the bass player with me in my band, This Great Religion, he ended up years later playing bass for Beck, I think on the early Odelay tours.
Yeah. And he was already there in the band when I joined in 97.
Yeah. So
it was during Odelay. Exactly.
Yeah. So, during that time I was, Justin and I, we would work on music together because we were still trying to figure out what, maybe it wouldn't be the band. Maybe we would make music as a new thing, or, so we would still collaborate. And I was also working on my own stuff. And I'd sent Justin some stuff for him to play on. Some crazy, I remember there was some stuff I was doing. It was like very sort of hyper fast bossa nova stuff with crazy drum filtering. And it was, and it was done with I had 5 samplers. And so it was all done with that. And it sounded insane. And it was kind of cool, and I think he had played some stuff for Beck of like, hey, just check out what Tony's doing. And this is right around the time where Beck was maybe starting to think about Midnight Vultures. Maybe he'd already kind of started it a little bit, but yeah, basically he's like, yeah, so, Tony, if you want to come down to LA, I was in San Francisco at the time. If you want to come down, let's just work on some stuff together, some tunes, and I'm like, yeah, I'll be right there. So I drove down with a couple crates of records, and because I was doing a lot of sampling at the time. Beck obviously was doing lots of sampling, and found something really cool on a Boney M record and got something going pretty fast. And he was like, man, this sounds cool. Can you come back tomorrow? I'll write the lyrics. We'll cut the vocals tomorrow afternoon. So I come back the next day, cut the vocals really fast.
Which song was it?
It was a song that never came out. We never really, I'm not even sure. We never really totally finished it. I think it was called, God, I can't remember, but it was never released, and I don't think we even really finished it. We never really came back to it after we got into actually working together officially. But it was a sample. It was a Boney M sample of a song called "Night Flight to Venus" that has this crazy flanged out drum fill, and I grabbed that little bit of that, and then we kind of built something around that. I'd love to hear it now.
Yeah, I would too.
Some hard drive somewhere, but it was cool. And so I came back the next day. We cut vocals in, I don't know, an hour. He's super fast. And then he's like, well, it's 2:00. You want to do something else? Find another thing, sample, get something going, build it up. And that's kind of how that evolved, and my involvement with Midnight Vultures.
This episode is brought to you by Soyuz microphones. At Soyuz, we make microphones the old-fashioned way. Everything from R&D, machining, assembly, and testing are done in-house by our own team of specialists. Our mics are known for having the Soyuz sound. Lows that are deep but not boomy, mids that are present but never boxy, and highs that are open and airy without sounding harsh. Soyuz mics have become known as true modern classics. Click the link in the description for more information or to find a dealer near you.
I remember there was a track he called me in to play on once around that, I think it was right around that time, called Midnight Vultures.
Yeah.
And it was that guy James Gadsden was playing the drums.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I can't remember what that sounded like, but yeah.
It was a pretty cool track. Yeah, well, anyway, that was a super interesting time. That was one of my next questions, was about your 5 samplers. And I think it was like Roland, Emu, Kurzweil. Was that the
2 emus? Yeah.
Right, 2 emus, a Kurzweil, a Roland, and we're missing one.
So 2 emus, Roland S550, Kurzweil K2000, and an SB 1200.
Yeah, you mixed a song for Brazzaville once back in the day called Genoa, and I remember that you used this amazing delay on the piano.
Yeah.
And I think somehow it picked up a little bit of an FM radio signal or something in it. There was some little thing, but there was kind of no way to get rid of it. And it almost added to it. So it ended up being a great thing. What was that? It was some sort of an analog delay or digital delay. I can't remember.
It was an analog delay. It was my Multivox delay. I forgot the model of it, but it's I still use it all the time. It doesn't have a very long delay time, at the most 300 milliseconds at best, but it's just awesome. It has such a vibe. It's super cool. It's funny. I did that in, everybody should check that song out. It's a beautiful song. It's a really cool song.
Thanks.
Brazzaville, Genoa. Check that out.
Yes. It's actually oddly popular in China. I get messages from people, but well, we can also talk about Mike Boydo. I mean, Mike Boydo is just, he's kind of impossible to describe if you've never met him, but he's a musical genius. And Beck used to tell me about like when Boydo actually played in the band and how it was just impossible to work with him because he was so, he'd have to start I think it was Where It's At, where he started, and, Beck would look over and Boydo had this portable juicer, like, where he could like make juice and he'd be doing that instead of playing the song.
A sandwich. Yeah. It's like,
yeah.
Like you can't make that shit up.
No, he played with Brazzaville, and literally one day we were rehearsing and I looked over and he was asleep on the sofa with his keyboard on his lap. But as soon as the song started, his finger, he started to play along, eyes closed, but, so yeah, he was and if I can find anything to link to that's kind of Boydo specific, I'll put that in the notes as well, in the comments.
I remember that was actually mixed on a Mackie. I forgot not a 1608, it was 2408. It was a 24 channel Mackie desk. That's what I had. That's what I was doing all my stuff on. And I had a ton of outboard pedals, and it sounded pretty,
It sounded great. You did it really fast too. I think I was there with you when you mixed it, and you ripped right through it. Like it's one of the better mixes I think I've ever had on a Brazzaville track.
Yeah, good old Mackie,
Yeah.
All right. I enjoyed that little thing.
Phoenix.
Yeah.
Alphabetical. Oh, wait. Sorry. Let me back up for a second, because there was something else I wanted to ask you about. Because you worked with Air on 10,000 Hertz Legend.
Yeah.
Was that through Beck that you ended up meeting Air or working with them?
Well, I'd already worked on the Beck album, and I think it had maybe come out, Midnight Vultures. I think it had just come out. And kind of going back to the Earwax days, I was basically anyone that wanted to work on something. I just wanted to work on music, cool stuff. And so just constantly looking for cool and fun projects and cool and fun people to work with. And so my friend, our mutual friend, Roger Manning, and our other mutual friend, Jason Faulkner, and Brian Reitzel. I don't know if you know Brian.
Peripherally.
Yeah. So Brian was a drummer. He was in a band called Red Cross. Years before that. But one of the drummers. But So Brian, Roger, and Jason were doing an album of a fake soundtrack, and they wanted it to kind of have it sound like a 70s, very retro and authentic soundtrack. So they asked me like, hey man, would you be down to record? We're going to be recording Brian's drums at this studio. And there's all these other instruments we need to record, and then we need it mixed. Would you be down to do that? And we have no money. I'm like, hell yeah, it sounds like fun. It's perfect. Yeah. So I did it, and we had a great time. I got to work on a Trident A range, which I'd never worked on before. So that was really cool to, with all this, I'm just gaining more and more experience, miking drums up in unusual ways. They weren't paying me, so I was able to kind of try some things out, and experiment a little bit, and they were down with that. And it came out really cool. It's this thing called Logan's Sanctuary. I don't think
was it ever released?
It was released. Yeah. I don't know if it's on Spotify or not, but it would definitely be on YouTube. And
I'll link to it.
Yeah. It's cool. It's super cool. And, we did it all super fast. And Brian, the drummer, ended up just after that playing drums for Air, French band Air. And Brian played this album that he did to the guys, to JB and Nico, and he said, hey, check out this thing that me and my friends did, just FYI. And so they listened to it and they're like, oh shit, these drums sound so cool. This whole thing sounds super cool. Who did it? And it's like, oh, my buddy Tony Hoffer. So next thing you know, I'm on a plane to Paris
I hate when that happens.
Like, you know what I mean? And it was I would have never expected that, just this little thing that for no money. So, and then that ended up being, I co-produced, I did co-production and mixed that album with them, and which came out really great. I'm really proud of that album. And that was a big thing for me because it put me in that region, being close to the region, meaning the UK and France. And, when I was there working with Air, Phoenix had just released their first album, and called United. And I met them. We saw them play at a really cool show. When Air and I went to London to master the album, 10,000 Hertz Legend, Phoenix were also playing Jules Holland. So we went on the Jules Holland show, just in the audience to see their buddies Phoenix play on TV. And so we got to hang out a little bit, and, and then a few years later, when it came time to do their second album, they reached out to me, and, and by that point I'd already done a few things for the label, which was Source and Virgin, and Philippe Ascoli, who is kind of the guy leading all of that. He and I did a lot of projects together over the years.
Very cool.
He had signed Phoenix and a number of other and Air and a number of other really cool artists.
Let's move on to the Kooks.
Yeah.
How'd you meet them?
So I met them through Philippe Ascoli. So Philippe was then, at that point, he was the MD of Virgin Records, Virgin UK, he was the head of Virgin. And he's like, Tony, I've got this band I signed called the Kooks. They've been a band for not very long, a matter of months. They got signed on basically 2 or 3 songs. So they didn't really have many songs. It was a very unusual situation, but there was just something there that was cool. And he sent me some stuff, and yeah, I loved it. I loved the demos of the 2 or 3 songs. They sound great. Count me in. So they had tried doing some recordings with some other people in London, and things it didn't quite work out. And then I think that's when Philippe actually reached out to me. There was also, and Nick Burgess was the other A&R involved who had recommended me for that project because I worked with both of them on a previous project. The band was called The Thrills, and that record did very well.
Then,
so they felt, okay, let's call Tony. He'll did great with The Thrills. He'll get the Kooks. He'll understand what needs to be done with them to get the best of the best, and it'll be great. And so, yeah, then I went out to the UK to work with the Kooks on their first album.
Wow. Great. Shall we move on to M83?
Yeah, M83. I'd been a fan of M83s for years, and had bought all their CDs and, and then Justin Melville Johnson, bass player, my whole band and music collaborator for many years. He was starting to get into production. In addition to playing bass, he wanted to expand into production. And M83 was, I think he had done a couple things before that, but that was one of his very early productions. And he asked if I'd be interested in mixing it. And I'm like, oh, absolutely. I love working with Justin and I'm a big fan of M83. So this is perfect. So that's pretty much how that came about. And it was a double album. It was 20 odd songs. And
what was the name of the album?
Hurry Up, We're Dreaming.
Okay.
Midnight City was kind of the most popular song, I guess, or
Midnight City.
Yeah. But many of them have done quite well. Yeah, and it was received very well. It kind of that album. It was a beautiful album, and it really expanded the artist's career. Which I love when that happens, and it's an album that even I'll put on from time to time and just go back to, and I kind of will remember things that I had forgotten about that were in there that that we worked on in there. But it was a double album. I think we did it in about a week and a half or 2 weeks. It was very quick, and a lot of tracks, a lot of stuff to wrangle. But we did it, and it came out great. I feel like
it's funny because I think it must have been right around that time. I saw a post from Justin on Facebook, basically saying, I've started my own. I have my own studio now. I want a primary vocal mic. I can't afford a vintage U47. What should I get? And so all these people start suggesting different things, and a few people mentioned Soyuz. And I wrote to Justin. I was like, Justin, that's my company. I'll get you a deal, And he was like, what? Like the same reaction. Like, because in the whole Beck band, I think I was the only one that I had like a sax and a guitar, didn't know Pro Tools from a hole in the wall, and he's like, that's your company? I said, yeah. And he ended up getting a 017 tube from us.
That's awesome. Yeah. 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 I'm just thinking that because I'm thinking back to, you had a sax, you had an acoustic guitar that you'd travel around with.
Yeah, a little one. And it actually was from Barcelona. We were on tour here in Barcelona. Somehow I ended up in a instrument shop on the Ramblas, it's not there anymore. And I bought this little mini guitar that just played sharp as hell going up the neck. It was a nylon string guitar. And I asked Smokey, because I was like a George Ben fanatic, and I asked Smokey, can you show me some chords, man? Smokey Hormel. And so he showed me how to play, some basic stuff on the guitar. And that was it. I had my guitar, my sax. What more did I need?
Yeah. And it's awesome. That's the thing, you just never know. And something will interest you, and then you go in a new thing, new direction. And
little did I know I'd end up living here, for the past 20 years.
Yeah.
You've said that you're a big brush stroke person in terms of production and mixing. And is that why you prefer broad EQs from Neve and API over like surgical SSL ones?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I'm like treble, mid, bass. If I could have loudness, like on an old stereo, you've got your treble, mid, bass, and that loud button that just made everything sound really good. That's what I like. I'm not a real tweaky person. Obviously, sometimes I have to do that to fix something or get something to fix some problem. You have to, of course, but I kind of learned early on that sometimes just turning, if you want somebody to come forward, you don't need to start doing crazy EQ. Sometimes just turning the volume up.
Turn it up.
Actually, we'll
Occam's razor. Yeah.
And just wider EQs. To me, it sounds better when I have a wider shape EQ versus something that's much narrower. To me, it just sounds a little tweezy, and it just doesn't sound right to me. So that's kind of what I've always done. I don't know.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and I tend to use those EQs when I'm recording and mixing. I tend to stick with those types of EQs and shape things that way.
I've also heard it said that this is a quote, "I'm always trying to recreate the sound of a sequential circuit's drum tracks. That's all I'm trying to do with acoustic drums."
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Does it have anything to do with building a tent around the drums?
Yeah, it does. This is sequential circuits drum tracks drum machine. The snare and the kick and the snare are just awesome. And it's similar to a Lin or a DMX. It's all kind of different shades of a similar thing. I'm just a big fan of the drum tracks. And actually, in fact, on the Phoenix album that I did, Alphabetical, the majority of the drum sounds there, the kick, definitely the kick, and at least 70% of the snare sounds are my drum tracks, kicks and snares. So, they may have been pitched up or pitched down a certain way to fit what we needed for the song, but that is, that is the drum tracks. And then we had a drummer come in and play hi-hat on top of that.
Oh, very cool.
And fills toms and that sort of thing. But I found in recording drums, and I'm a big fan of dry drums, not roomy drums, but sometimes you do need roomy drums depending on what you're working on. So I'll set up a tent with just blankets, packing blankets, and some of them have been pretty elaborate, almost like rooms, and we'll have it to where there is no outside room coming into any of the mics. So it's just a super beautiful dry sound. But then I'll throw room mics on the other side of the tent. So we'll have room mics that are getting a room sound. So I can either have bone dry or full on room with just a matter of tweaking the faders.
And they pick up enough from outside the tent?
Uh-huh. Oh yeah. And it sounds great. So I've done that for forever, for years.
Do you ever put anything over the snare, like a t-shirt or
Yeah. Usually everything is pretty treated. The snare, the toms. Yeah, we'll use like thin towels, lots of tape. what phones, whatever we can put on there just to kind of stop any ringing.
And do you like close miking, or do you have a preferred way of miking drums?
So these days, and for many years, I'll put close mics on everything, because if you're in a studio and you've got the mics, then it only makes sense to do that. So, and I like having everything ready to go. So I'll put close mics on everything. On the kick, usually one mic inside, like a 47 Fed or something. And on the snare, two mics, top and bottom, toms, close mics. I'll place overheads. We'll place overheads, stereo overheads, which rarely get used, but they're
interesting.
There. I'll also do a mono overhead of a different flavor, different mic that's treated differently, compressed, maybe distorted a little bit.
What kind of mic would you use for the mono overhead, just out of curiosity?
Like a Coles.
Like a ribbon. Okay.
Yeah. And then right in front of the kit, which ends up being the main part of the sound, 90% of the time, I use I call it the kit mic. And it's basically, I've had this mic for years. It's a Shure VP88, which is a stereo mic. And I basically point it, I'll have the drummer play, and I just kind of find a good place in the room where it sounds good, kind of in front of the kit. I'll walk very close to it and then kind of walk back, and maybe about 4 or 5 feet away. Sounds good. Drums have always sounded good to me standing right in front of the kit. So I put that stereo mic right there.
Inside the tent.
Yeah, inside the tent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that will end up being the main part of the sound, and then I'll blend in kick, snare, toms will need to be there. You need mics usually on the toms. And, then sometimes we'll throw a couple other just fun mics that are mangled just to see if we can get something interesting to happen.
Yeah. And I remember actually, I think you and I had a conversation years ago where you were telling me about phase, and when you're like listening back to drums and you're flipping the phase and stuff, like making sure that all the mics are in phase.
Yeah.
Do you just flip it, or how do you do that? Do you start with one particular mic usually?
Yeah, usually would be, knowing that the kit mic is going to be the main.
You start with that. Uh-huh.
So the kit mic, and then how everything relates to that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But, I'll kind of just check out the different mics and just see how everything's sounding, because every song is going to be different. It's going to have a different treatment,
Sure.
Some songs, it might just be that one Coles, that one mono overhead with a little bit of kick. And, so each song, I'm able to have the drum presentation be drastically different from one song to the next by having that set up and having everything ready to go. And, you tweak compression and EQ and, for each song, and, you tweak as you go. But in terms of the mics, like everything's for the most part there. We have everything that we would need. But yeah, you've got to definitely check phase. Without a doubt, it's one of the most fundamental and important things to get your song to sound right. Because if you don't get it right with the drums, then the bass guitar that you do, or the synth bass, you're not going to have a good sense of how much low end is actually there, and it's just not going to stack up right. And then it's going to make it trickier to mix. It's not going to come together as quickly when you get into mix mode.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm checking phase, in recording, checking phase all the way through. And then when I get to mixing, I'll check it again.
Oh yeah. So I wanted to ask you about like signature sounds, signature things. If there's anything that you carry from record to record, I mean, one thing might be that delay you were talking about drum tents. Is there anything that you've discovered in your journey as a producer and a mixer I guess more as a producer, that you find yourself going back to, like a tool in your bag of tricks that you like?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's probably a lot of things that, and a lot of them might be actual things that I to process audio, but some of them are also concepts that will always apply. One concept being the tent, kit mic. I like to work fast because I feel it gives it kind of builds in perspective to the project. So in some ways I don't know. And I also feel a lot of cool things happen when you work fast, when you don't just get so deep into some little thing and then go down the rabbit hole, and then you're wasting all of your time is just ticking away.
You lose perspective.
And you kind of lose something like a fresh excitement, that was there early in the very beginning of the song.
I've heard that Thelonious Monk wouldn't do more than 2 takes. Like, he wouldn't let anyone do more than 2 takes, because he said the first take is going to have the most energy and creative energy, and the second take, maybe beyond that, it's lost. And I don't remember what recording it is exactly, but Coleman Hawkins comes in earlier. There's a mistake. There's like a clear mistake.
Yeah. And keep it.
He left it. Yeah, he left it. And I think it's so funny, because something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is how back in the day, before digital recording, people used their ears during the recording process. That was the way that you judged what was going on.
Oh.
And with digital recording, you might go, oh God, that hi-hat's really rushing, but it wouldn't bother you if you were just hearing it, but seeing it visually, like not sort of lining up to the grid. So people are kind of listening with their eyes, and yet you're creating a product that's going to be, or, an end result that's going to be experienced with your ears. So
it's weird. It's weird, and I think a lot of these things that I carry with me, I actually learned, working with Beck on Midnight Vultures and a little bit on Guero. I learned a lot, kind of speaking to what you're saying about letting things go. I'll definitely keep mistakes, or I'll keep, if things initially are a little rickety, the feel is it's on the verge of falling apart, especially with that Kooks album. A lot of those songs, there's no click. And I was trying to find the takes that were the most wild, about to fall apart kind of takes. When they started playing the song too much, things would straighten out a little bit, and then we would just take a break or go on to something else and go back, and then just get that vibe, And I remember, early on working with Beck, he was all about just keep it greasy, 1 or 2 takes. There'd be clearly mistakes there, or whatever, mistakes in the sense of something maybe rushed a little bit. But so yeah, it's easy to fix, or you could leave it. And then I think with, if you kind of analyze Beck music, especially back in that era, the way it works so well, because he had such a solid foundation with the rhythm section, which allowed him to play his guitar. He's an amazing guitar player, by the way. People don't really talk about that much, but I don't think he knows any scales. Maybe he does, but he just always knows. He just has a feel for it. He knows where to go, and it's really remarkable watching him play, like, right next to you, and kind of find his way through a part. And he'd kind of just figure it out with a few little mistakes. It's like, okay, good. Next thing, let's go. And like, all right, cool, we're keeping, all right, good. Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, yeah, it is cool and it's fine, you know? And so sometimes I'll work with people and I'll be building up this track and it's sounding a little rough, you know? And I had to tell them like, look, trust me, just let's keep it going. Let's fill it in. It's too bare right now. Let's get the other things on there. And then it sounds really cool. You know, when you start getting other instruments on there and then the vocals get on there, it actually sounds really cool and it sounds different than everything else. It sounds a lot.
Yeah, and in the age of AI and the age of, you know, software that can like quantize your drums for you and all that kind of stuff, I think that people probably appreciate some humanity. They appreciate something that isn't perfect. In the same way that, like, we have this product at Soyuz called the Launcher, and the Launcher was meant to boost the gain of, like, you know, SM7Bs and ribbon mics, things that don't have much gain. But unlike the other booster boxes around, I wanted to make it so that it wasn't transparent gain. So it did a little something to it, you know, like an old mixing board would. And it took like 2 years to develop it, to make it sound kind of how I was imagining. But people love it. They love it. It's clean is easy, perfect is easy. Finding the magic in a track is what's tricky.
I mean, the majority of my time is spent making things not sound clean. You have to go to great lengths to make stuff sound gritty and, you know, but not distorted and saturated, but just to have a like Motown and Stax records, and you know, there's a grit to those records, which with computer, you know, recording on with a computer, like it's everything's just super clean. So yeah, I have to go to great lengths to kind of break things a little bit just to get them to sound more exciting and more I don't know, to have a sound to it, a little edge.
Yeah, no, I get it. And the thing that I find also with writing songs is each one is different. You know, you always want to feel like, okay, I've cracked the code now, but it's always different every single time. Like it's just like every day is different than the day before. So it's always going to be a matter of just keeping an open mind and trusting your taste, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So last question.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your studio in Austin, because before I ran into you recently in LA, I didn't even know that you'd moved to Austin. And just tell me a little bit about your studio, if there's anything that you particularly love that's in it. Is it different from your LA studio in any way? Just
Yeah. So I still have my LA studio. It's nearly identical to my LA studio, dimensionally. And I had the same studio designer design it, George Augsburger, who's brilliant. He's designed some of the most iconic studios in Los Angeles, and you know, a lot of studios that I've worked in over the years. And so he designed my LA studio, and then when we were doing the Austin thing, I hit him up again and say, hey, would you be down to do my Austin studio? And so we basically designed it to where I could go back and forth and there would not be any adjusting to my ears needing to be done.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so it's cool. So, and it's funny because I'm not in my studio now, but you know, back when we were doing Zooms every day during the pandemic, the view behind me looked a certain way, and so people got to, you know, they'd see I'm in my studio. I have there's a big diffuser in the back of the room, and then when we moved to Austin, there's still a big diffuser in the back. Like it looks exactly the same. So no one really knew that I'd moved. No one, you know.
That's amazing. Wow.
The view the same, but it's yeah. I mean, it's all my gear. I mean, to be honest, a lot of it is the same gear. When I worked with you on that Brazzaville track, I have a lot of that same gear that I still use, I still use a lot of my outboard, all my crazy delays, reverbs, distortion units. I've got tons of pedals. With production, I use a lot of pedals that I'm producing. I'll run audio pedals.
What do you use pedals on, just quickly?
Everything.
Everything?
Literally, yeah.
Okay, which pedals, for example? Maybe not specific pedals, but what kind of pedals? Or specific, if you want.
I mean, what's a good one? There's the broadcast pedal is really cool. It's kind of a weird overdrive pedal.
What would you use that on typically? Everything.
Yeah. It's great because it has a wide range. You can do a lot with it, but it's like a grit kind of pedal. So you can do like subtle grit to full out fuzz. But yeah, I'd use it. I mean, mainly guitar, but it's awesome on keyboards, synths, and bass and drums. I use a Memory Man a lot. I've got an older Memory Man that gets used quite a bit in a number of ways. So much. Sans Amp I use all the time on bass.
Sure.
I always track Sans Amp with bass as a parallel. So I'll always do DI, the amp, and then a third line, which will be Sans Amp, and sometimes a fourth line, which would be a Big Muff.
Very cool. Well,
but yeah,
Tony,
constantly, yeah.
Such a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, yeah.
Are you, by chance, going to be at AES this year?
Probably not. Probably not this year. But you never know. You'll be there.
I think I'll be there. Yeah, let me know if you're going to be there. Or Anyway, I hope our paths cross again soon.
I'm sure they will.
And yeah, man, always a pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
Likewise, yeah, absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks.
All right, talk to you soon.
Cool. See it.